my friends. Dr. Curry Myers here, better known as America's Criminologist. In my book, The Advent of Feral Man, I talked about the importance of faith, family, and formation. This podcast is dedicated to just that, reigniting those three important pillars back into society. We've been doing a video study, if you will, of the history of the Catholic Church. We've laid it out from the beginning. We're now at 1054 to 1300 AD, when unity was fractured, swords were drawn, and saints still rose. It's an era of schisms, crusades, and Christendom under strain. Now, in the first 1,000 years of Christianity, it was really about survival and being one, having a unity that was there. Well, this next chapter is really about strain. This is where Christian civilization is no longer hiding in the catacombs. It's legal now. There's been churches built, beautiful churches. It's crowned, it's structured. There's apostolic succession. It's powerful and it's vulnerable. Between 1054 and 1300, we see the formal rupture between Christian East and Christian West. We see the Crusades, the collision between papal authority and imperial power. We see internal doctrinal crises. And yet, astonishingly, spiritual renewal still occurred during this time period. This period is not a morality tale about simple heroes and villains. It's actually a case study on what happens when divine truth operates through fallen humanity. And the Catholic position must be stated clearly from the beginning. The church is holy because Christ is holy. The church is composed of sinners because humanity is fallen. Both realities are visible to this day, and this era was no different. Now, take the year 1054. It did not create division, but it did formalize it. Tensions between Rome and Constantinople had been developing for centuries. There were cultural, there were linguistical, there were political divides widening after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The Latin West and the Greek East increasingly misunderstood one another, and really through the deadly seven sins: avarice, which is pride, lack of humility, the lack of communication that occurred back and forth. It was horrible. The mutual excommunications between the legates of Pope Leo IV and Patriarch Michael Cyrilius marked the symbolic rupture that occurred. Now, some key theological issues included the Filioque clause in the Nicene Creed, the extent of papal primacy, and liturgical differences and ecclesial customs. Now, the Church maintains that the Bishop of Rome, as successor of Peter, remember this goes back to Christ turned the keys over to Peter. Peter went to Rome. That's why the Bishop of Rome has this unique power as the Pope, a primacy of jurisdiction towards all unity for everybody else. This isn't tyranny. It's actually service to communion. It's Christ's words in Matthew 16. And it wasn't ceremonial. It was ecclesiological. Yet the Eastern churches retained apostolic succession and valid sacraments. This was not a collapse of Christianity. It was a tearing of communion. Now, Christ prayed in John 17 that we may be one. The schism represents a wound to that prayer, and it's a wound that remains to this day. And once unity fractures, history becomes more unstable. Now, their modern narratives often present the Crusades as irrational aggression, and this is historically shallow thinking. By the 11th century, Muslim expansion had overtaken formerly Christian territories in North Americas and the Middle East. They killed Christians that were on those lands. They killed pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem, and they faced not only being killed, but taken hostage, being brutalized. The Byzantine Empire appealed for Western military aid against the Seljuk Muslim Turks at that time. So in 1095, Pope Urban II called Western Knights to assist their Eastern brethren and secure safe passage for pilgrims. The First Crusade was framed as an armed pilgrimage, penitential in character, not colonial in intent. However, here is where maturity was required. The church does not canonize every act committed during the Crusades. Why? Because men were involved. There were massacres. There was violence. There was political opportunism. And the catastrophic sack of Constantinople in 1204 during the Fourth Crusade. The last event, Christian attacking Christians, deepened the schism profoundly. And Catholic moral theology does allow for a just war under strict conditions, but just war theory never sanctifies cruelty, vengeance, or excess. So what were the Crusades? They were attempts to defend Christian lands. They were efforts to protect pilgrims who traveled. They were military responses within a medieval worldwide view of Christendom. What they were not was a simple tale of imperial greed. They were not a campaign of forced conversions. And they were not an unqualified triumph of righteousness. The truth is complex because humanity is complex. Now, as Christendom matured politically, a crucial question emerged. Who governs the church? The investiture controversy between Pope Gregory VI and Emperor Henry IV centered on whether secular rulers could appoint bishops. The Catholic position was and remains to this day clear. Spiritual authority cannot be subordinated to political control. When Henry IV famously stood in the snow at Canossa, seeking absolution, it symbolized a profound principle. Kings answer to God. Yet the proximity of church and crown created ongoing tension. Bishops held lands. Popes negotiated alliances. Kings evoked divine legitimacy. Faith informed governance, but governance also influenced faith. Now, this lesson is sobering. Power magnifies virtue, but it also magnifies vice. Whenever the church aligns too comfortably with political power, her prophetic voice weakens. And yet, during the same period, theological clarity flourished. The 12th and 13th centuries witnessed doctrinal changes, including the Cathar, or the Albigensian movement, which denied the goodness of creation and rejected core Christian doctrines. The church responded through preaching and through councils, and in some questions, military suppression. Yes, again, uncomfortable, but this era was not mere conflict. It was an astonishing renewal. It gave us the rise of universities, the flowering of scholastic theology, the brilliance of men like St. Thomas Aquinas, whose synthesis of faith and reason remains foundational today. The radical evangelical witness of Francis of Assisi, who embodied poverty and peace in an age of power. Now, notice this pattern. When corruption surfaces, the Holy Spirit raises reformers. When faith becomes entangled in politics, saints recenter it on Christ. The church resilience does not come from flawless leaderships, it comes from divine foundation. By 1300, Christendom was still standing, but certainly strained. East and West remained divided. Crusading zeal had waned. Political ecclesial tensions persisted, and eternal reform was ongoing. And yet, the sacraments endured. Apostolic succession remained intact. The creed was still proclaimed, and the Eucharist was still celebrated. Empire shifted, but the Mass continued. This is not accidental. Christ promised preservation, not comfort. This period offers us a mirror today. Civilizations rarely collapse from a single external attack. They weaken internally first. Division erodes strength. Pride distorts mission. Power tempts compromise, and the loss of unity invites vulnerability. But renewal is always possible. This era teaches us that church survives not because her members are perfect, but because her founder is faithful. And perhaps that the most important takeaway, history becomes uncomfortable here, but discomfort purifies sentimentality. The church is not a myth of uninterrupted political triumph. She is sacramentally reality, sustained through the storms, and the storms did not prevail. Between 1054 and 1300 AD, Christian civilization stood at its height, but it also revealed its fragility. Schisms wounded unity, and crusades revealed zeal and excess. Power tested humility, heresy demanded clarity, and saints restored the balance. This chapter forces us to confront something essential. The church is divine in origin, human in operation, and preserved by grace. And despite fractures and conflicts and imperfections, the promise remains: the gates of hell shall not prevail. In our next history episode, we're going to go from 1300 to 1517 AD, and it's going to be the crisis before the storm. We'll examine the Avignon papacy, the Black Death, the Western Schism, and the mounting pressure that would culminate in the Protestant Reformation. Because strain, when unresolved, becomes a rupture, and history never sleeps. But God is with us all the time. This is Dr. Curry Myers. Look forward to you following me and my work. Stay safe.